call came at 2:51 in the morning. That hour has its own language. Nobody dials at 2:51 with good news. Nobody calls to catch up. I was pulled from a dead sleep by the sound, and before I even reached for the phone, something in the oldest part of my chest already knew that what was coming was going to change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Renata Flores from Millbrook County General. She was steady but careful the way trained professionals get when delivering information that will detonate inside the person receiving it. She said, "Vincent, you need to come to the hospital right now. Marcus has been in an accident. It is serious. But Vincent, listen to me carefully. Come alone. Do not bring Diane. Do not tell her anything yet. My name is Vincent Caruso. I am 71 years old. 4 decades in long-haul freight taught me to read roads, weather, and people. For 9 years, I had been reading my son-in-law, Marcus, watching him perform the devoted husband. The way an actor performs a role rehearsed so many times, it no longer requires effort. I had been watching. I had told my daughter what my instincts said, and she had not believed me. And I had accepted that there are things a father cannot force his child to see before she is ready. But that night at 2:51, the curtain finally began to come down. Marcus had arrived 9 years earlier, like something scripted. He was 34 years old, well-dressed, well-spoken. Handshake firm enough, smile quick enough. He knew my late wife Margaret liked yellow roses and brought them every visit. He knew my daughter Diane took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and a splash of cream, and he remembered without being told. He spent a weekend building a garden bed for Margaret before she passed, kneeling in the dirt with his sleeves rolled up, looking every inch the man you would want your daughter beside. My wife adored him. Before she left us, she squeezed my hand and told me that Diane had chosen well. I did not argue with a dying woman, but I did not agree. There is a performance that reads differently to someone who spent a lifetime watching people under pressure. Long-haul driving teaches you that. When miles wear a person down, and there is nothing to gain from pretending, you see who they actually are. Marcus never had those unguarded moments. He was always performing, always calibrated, always exactly what the room needed him to be. The way he looked at Diane was not love. It was inventory. He built walls between my daughter and everyone who had known her before him. He did it with charm, which is the most effective method, because the person being isolated never notices the walls going up. They just gradually find themselves in a smaller and smaller world, with one person at the center of it. He had also, I would later learn, taken out multiple life insurance policies on Diane following their marriage. Significant policies, the kind a genuinely loving husband might acquire for genuine peace of mind, which is exactly how he described them to anyone who asked. I drove to Millbrook County General through November rain that had turned the roads to black mirrors. The hospital materialized out of the dark, all fluorescent light and antiseptic, and the particular silence of a building full of people trying not to die. Dr. Flores met me at the end of a corridor that smelled of bleach and recycled air. She was in scrubs, and her face carried the kind of weight that does not come from a standard emergency call. She led me into a consultation room, closed the door, and pulled the blinds. Through a narrow window, I saw Marcus across the hall, tubes in his arms, an oxygen mask fogging faintly with each breath. The man who had spent 9 years being the most composed person in every room now looked like something the night had chewed up and left behind. Dr. Flores faced me directly, voice low and controlled. "Vincent, Marcus did not lose control of that vehicle because of road conditions. He lost consciousness behind the wheel. We ran blood panels before surgery. What we found was thallium poisoning, a significant accumulation, indicating repeated exposure over a period of weeks. Someone has been putting this substance in his food or drink gradually, systematically, over time. Thallium. I knew enough to know it was serious, insidious, the kind of poison that destroys from inside slowly enough that by the time symptoms are clear, the damage is already deep. Dr. Flores leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice further. There is something else, Vincent. Before Marcus lost consciousness in the vehicle, he was apparently lucid enough to speak. The paramedics reported that he was repeating something in the ambulance. He was saying that Diane and the children were in danger. She handed me a thick brown envelope sealed with tape and told me to read it in my truck and move quickly. I walked out into the rain. In the cab of my truck with the door shut and the world pouring down, I tore the envelope open. What was inside rearranged everything. I thought I understood about 9 years. The first page contained an identification photograph. The face was Marcus. The name printed beneath it was not. It read Daniel Pruitt. He was a documented con artist with a federal investigation file. Before Diane, he had been married twice. Both of those women were dead. One had fallen from a second-floor landing in what was ruled an accident. The other had died of complications from what appeared initially to be severe food poisoning. In both cases, within weeks of each death, Daniel Pruitt had collected substantial life insurance payments totaling nearly $4.5 million across the two policies combined. I turned to the final page. My hands had stopped shaking, which happens when shock passes a certain point, and the body goes quiet to survive what the mind is processing. The final page was a copy of Diane's most recently activated life insurance policy. The payout clause had a trigger date. It was 11 days away. The sum placed on my daughter's life was $6.5 million. He had done this before. He had a method. He had a partner. In the files there was a handwritten list of names, people who had assisted in the previous schemes. There was always a woman involved, appearing in the final weeks before each death, positioned as a trusted family member or friend, helping manage logistics, making sure nothing unraveled at the critical moment. The name circled on the page in red ink was Sandra. Marcus had introduced her to the family 3 weeks earlier as his cousin from out of state, visiting while she recovered from a minor health issue. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and had made herself useful around the house. Her real name was Cynthia Marsh. She had 2 outstanding federal warrants and a documented history of involvement in at least 3 prior insurance fraud schemes, resulting in death. She was in Diane's house right now, with my grandchildren. My grandson Eli was 5. My granddaughter Sophie was 7. Asleep. No idea. I put the truck in gear and drove. The road to Diane's house cuts through a stretch of dense pine at the edge of town, and in the rain at that hour, the trees close around the headlights in a way that feels suffocating. I called my brother Lou. Lou spent 22 years in the Marine Corps and has never been rattled by a phone call regardless of the hour or content. I kept it brief. Get to Diane's house now. The woman staying there is dangerous. The children are inside. Come ready. I parked 100 yards short of the driveway with headlights off. The house was dark except for one brief flicker on the upper floor, the children's bedroom, appearing once and dying. I moved through the wet grass to the back of the house. Diane's spare key was where she had always kept it, beneath the ceramic frog planter on the back step. I eased the door open. Inside, the house smelled of the macaroni and cheese the children had eaten for dinner, and underneath it, Cynthia's heavy floral perfume. I moved through the dark kitchen and into the hallway. At the foot of the staircase, I heard footsteps descending from above. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I pressed myself into the shadow beneath the stairs. The beam of a phone flashlight swept down the steps ahead of Cynthia as she came down. She was carrying a large duffel bag. Her face in the thin light was completely flat. No anxiety, no urgency, no expression that in any way resembled the gentle cousin who had poured tea and spoken warmly about the children over the past 3 weeks. She was wearing gloves. She stopped on the bottom step. Something had made her pause. She switched the flashlight off. The house went completely dark. I could hear her breathing in the silence. I stepped out of the shadow and put myself between her and the front door. I switched on my flashlight and aimed it at her face. She recoiled, then recovered, and the fake warmth returned to her expression with the practiced speed of someone who has pulled that particular mask on many times before. She said, "Vincent, goodness, you frightened me. I was just gathering a few things to take to the hospital for Marcus." She moved to step around me. I did not move. I looked at the duffel bag. I looked at her right hand, which she was keeping turned slightly away from me. There was a dark stain near her wrist that had not been there the last time I had seen her. I said, "Where are Eli and Sophie?" The warmth left her face completely. What remained underneath was the thing she actually was: cold, calculating, and cornered. Her hand moved slowly toward her jacket pocket. Headlights swept across the front windows. A vehicle braked hard in the driveway. Lou's boots hit the back porch before the engine had fully stopped, and the back door came open with enough force to announce that the man entering had no interest in being quiet about it. Cynthia moved. She came at me fast and low, driving her shoulder into my chest, trying to push through to the door. I am 71 years old, and I have been called stubborn my entire life. And at that moment, every year of stubbornness compressed into something useful. I planted my feet and pushed back, and she went down hard. The duffel bag hit the floor, and something inside it broke with a wet sound. Lou was there in 4 seconds. He had her pinned before she could get back to her feet. I did not stay to watch. I went up the stairs in the dark and pushed open the children's bedroom door. Eli and Sophie were in their beds. I stood there for a moment in the doorway, just breathing. Then I gathered them both up, still mostly asleep, carried them downstairs, put them in the back of my truck, and drove to the county sheriff's office as the rain finally began to ease. By the time the sun came up, Marcus, or Daniel Pruitt, had been placed under arrest in his hospital room. Cynthia Marsh was in custody. The contents of the duffel bag, which included sealed vials later confirmed to contain thallium compounds, and a set of documents with Diane's forged signature on several financial instruments, were in evidence. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway of the sheriff's office, waiting for someone to tell me what came next. My grandchildren had been taken to a quiet room with a deputy who had found a box of crackers somewhere. My jacket was still damp. I was 71 years old, and I had not slept, and I could feel every year of it pressing down on me. Then my phone rang. It was Diane. There was no crying. Her voice was cold and tight and shaking with something that was not grief. She said, "I know what you did, Dad. You have hated Marcus since the beginning. You hated him for 9 years, and now you have done this. You have destroyed everything. You took my children in the middle of the night without telling me. I do not want to hear your voice. I do not want to see you." The call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand and looked at the floor. I did not blame her. That is the hardest thing to explain to someone who has not watched the person they love be systematically deceived over nearly a decade. The deception does not just fool the person from the outside. It reconstructs the way they see everything, including themselves, including the people who love them. Diane had built 9 years of her life on the foundation of her belief in Marcus. Asking her to pull that foundation out from under herself overnight was asking her to let everything she had built come down at once. Of course she refused. Of course she blamed me. I was the safest target for an unbearable truth. I bore it. I sat on that bench, and I bore it. The days that followed were the loneliest of my life. 11 of them. Diane would not answer my calls. She had arranged for a friend to look after the children, and she had closed the house and made it clear that as far as she was concerned, I had been the one to destroy her family, not the man currently sitting in federal custody. The federal investigators were patient with her. They provided documentation, evidence files, the histories of the 2 previous wives, the timeline of the insurance policies, the communication records between Marcus and Cynthia. She received it all and sent it back unopened on the 3rd day. I sat in my house in the evenings and thought about Margaret and whether she would have known what to say. She usually did. She had a gift for finding the one sentence that unlocked a person when everything else had failed. I did not have that gift. I only had the patience to wait. On the evening of the 11th day, I heard a car in the driveway. Footsteps on the porch, slower than usual, heavier. The door opened. Diane stood in the entrance. She looked like someone who had not slept properly in nearly 2 weeks, which was accurate. Her hair was pulled back without care. Her eyes were swollen. In her hands, she was holding a thick folder, the evidence package the federal office had sent for a 3rd time, which this time she had opened. She looked at me across the room. A single tear moved down her face, and then she said 4 words, quietly. I read all of it. I stood up from my chair. She crossed the room and put her arms around me and wept in a way I had not heard from her since she was a small child. The kind of weeping that does not come from sadness alone, but from the specific anguish of realizing how completely and how long you have been fooled by someone you trusted entirely. I held my daughter and did not say anything. Sometimes the most important thing a father can offer is simply the fact of being there to hold on to. 3 months later, the federal trial concluded. Daniel Pruitt was convicted on 2 counts of murder for the deaths of his previous wives, 1 count of attempted murder for the poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and multiple additional charges. Cynthia Marsh received a substantial sentence on her own charges. Diane sat beside me in the courtroom for every day of that trial. She held my hand during the verdict. When the sentences were read, she did not cry. She sat very still, and when it was over, she looked at me and nodded once, a small private acknowledgement between a father and his daughter in a room full of strangers. My grandchildren are doing well. Eli has decided he wants to be a marine biologist, which changes weekly, but I support all of it. Sophie has become interested in photography and has already taken approximately 4,000 pictures of the dog. The garden bed Marcus built for Margaret is still there. I have kept it. Margaret loved it, and what she loved I try to honor regardless of who built it or what they turned out to be. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. The most dangerous people are not the obviously frightening ones. They are the ones who learn exactly what you need to feel safe, and then give it to you deliberately and precisely as a means to an end. Watch the moments when no one is watching them back. Watch what their eyes do when they think no one is looking. And if the person who loves you most tells you something feels wrong, before you dismiss it, ask yourself honestly what it would cost you to simply check. It might cost you nothing. It might save everything. Subscribe if this story stayed with you. Leave a comment. Share it with someone you love. These stories deserve to be heard, because the people who lived them deserve to know that what they went through mattered enough for someone to listen.